All right, and we're live. So welcome everybody to the JPES Tutoring YouTube channel. Today, we're going to talk about some really important questions about
Hi, so
schools.
welcome everybody to the JPES
Particularly
Tutoring
schools
channel.
that are,
Today, we'll talk about some
hold on
really
a
important
second.
questions.
I'm hearing feedback and I think
Hi,
it's
so welcome everybody to the JPES
particularly
Tutoring
schools
channel.
that
Today,
are,
we'll talk about some
hold on
really
a
important
second.
questions.
I'm hearing feedback and I
Hi,
think
so welcome everybody to the
close,
JPES
close
Tutoring
the other, yeah, close me. I was open. Oh, good. We've got some other people watching too. Okay, I guess one of you fixed it. Maybe it was me. Okay. Anyways, when you go live, it's really important because we are talking about things that matter to us right now without any editing. It's always going to be a current event issue. What do schools fail to teach our kids? We're not here to bash schools or teachers, but we know that schools aren't perfect because humans aren't perfect. There are so many different types of needs, especially today, where a classroom full of children, they all deserve to learn, but they're not coming from the same educational backgrounds. They're coming from different cultures. They've got different things going on, and not everything can be taught appropriately. So the reason we're talking about it is so that we can all come together and say, hey, as online tutors who we're doing this seriously full time, we know what to do to fix the gaps that students have because of schools not being able to meet those gaps. Okay. So I want to talk about first what we wish we'd learned, because anything I wish I learned, I try to emphasize with students today. So I'm going to leave it to Linda and Darcy and Clara. I guess Linda said your name first. So what you guys can do, you can just unmute yourself and when you're ready to speak. So Linda, what is one thing you wish you had learned in school that you just simply didn't learn?
Well, back in the day, history was taught like a string of dates and wars, and it felt very disconnected. I'm sure that they told us in sentences how these things were connected, but it really wasn't put together in any kind of cohesive way that you could process while trying to learn all those dates. And so I came out of school not remembering any historical dates. I the other day I saw a meme on um, on my phone, and it said, "Do you remember any date from your high school history class?" And I remembered 1066, but I didn't remember what happened in 1066. It's just like it wasn't very integrated or visual or related to our lives. And, just the whole geographical political stuff was just very, it was very old. Like they didn't present new stuff. And there was also a really big thing that happened in the 70s and 80s with social studies, basically, which was that we didn't learn anything about China. Nothing. They weren't even in the books. So it was weird.
Okay, so right, there's nothing better than seeing a timeline and making sense of things, but you learn things in fragments. So yeah, how are you really going to fully understand? And learning something from BC era to the Cold War, that's usually as far as it got. Like I didn't learn anything about Vietnam. You'd hear people talk about Nam, and I was like, I couldn't tell you why, because the history books we never covered the year we ran out of time. So yeah, it's like if history teachers are able to sit down and cover all of history, well, it's almost impossible to do, right? But if you can make sense of any part of it, then you you are more well-rounded. But it's like, how do we really do it? And
Well,
for the appropriate
I
age.
think what they need to do is give us the meaning, not just the memorizing of the dates and the events, but give us broad swaths of understanding about how certain things happen, like when um, when a democracy is being invented or being started, being created in a developing country. You have these stages that it goes through. And so you're going to overturn the monarch, then you're going to have some anarchy, then you're going to have an oligarchy, a few people rising up, right, to kind of try to organize things, and then eventually you get around to democracy. Well, now let's look at how that happened. That same kind of chaos to organization feeling happened in different situations and at different times. Like, it just needs to be with more comprehension.
So one teacher always said this: history repeats itself. But when you're young, you don't fully know what that means or why. You're like, okay, sure, but why? History is a great topic. I love it. But what's something else, Darcy? What's something that you wish you had learned? It could be history related, or could just anything academically that you think, geez, I should have learned that. Just go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm for sure history is something that I thought it was boring until after I was finished with college. Then I realized, oh, this is the most fascinating subject. I think it's very fascinating now. So for sure that's something. But since I teach kids that have dyslexia, I wanted to talk about that. Many people don't realize there is like kids that don't read well. I wasn't one of them. So, but I know people that just got passed through because no one knew how to teach them to read. And they didn't learn to read well, and they were not good in school because of that. And no one knew what to do about that. And when I thought that I knew how to teach reading when I graduated with a degree in elementary education, and I thought that I knew how to teach reading until I had the kid that struggled with reading. And then I realized that I did not know how. I mean, I knew how to do things that, if someone caught on easily, then they would learn to read. And most of the kids in my class did. But if someone really was struggling, I didn't know what to do. And I since then have realized that in this country, that's the common thing, that we don't learn even in teacher preparation school how to teach reading to students that struggle.
So you bring up the interesting point. When I was thinking things I wish I'd learned, I was going back to when I was younger, thinking that would have benefited me. But actually, there's stuff in college, university that, yeah, we should have learned, definitely. You're saying I should have learned other strategies, right, for teaching, because this is what you do now. And fine, you can always learn later, but that's because you like learning. Some adults would have just given up and said, if I didn't learn it back then, I don't have time to learn it now. You do, but because that's what your passion is. So are you glad now that you've been able to learn new ways to teach struggling readers?
Yes, I am. I was really mad that I didn't, when I first, I needed to know this because I had a daughter that needed to learn how to read. And I was like, I was mad that I had a degree in elementary education and didn't know these things.
Like, we learn what we need to know. We seek it out if it's really important. But I think I feel nervous when I think I have a student here that I want them to learn this thing, but there's sometimes, even with me, there's not a lot of time. And I think it's just my eagerness to want to teach and go over everything. I try to pick what's most relevant for them, what's important. Clara, what's something you wish you had learned? If anything, maybe you learned everything.
Well, since Darcy was talking about what she learned in teacher education, I'd like to talk about that too, because I also did teacher education for secondary school science. And I think it was pretty interesting how I went through the entire year, and they talked about things like social justice and classroom management a little bit, and all sorts of like educational, like the philosophy of education. And one of the things that they did not talk about was like how to actually impart skills onto students. Like, if I learned how to be a secondary science teacher, they didn't really talk about how to get someone who is struggling with balancing chemical equations to being able to do that. Like, we did a lot of these things called demos, where students are supposed to learn by doing some sort of like an activity and they're supposed to come up with their own idea about how things work. Well, what if their idea is wrong? Like it's scientifically and not accurate. Then how would you get them to go from not knowing how science works to actually being able to do science? So I felt like in teacher education, they teach you everything except how to teach.
And that's all we're there for, isn't it?
Yeah,
How do
I
I
thought
know?
that's what they were going to teach us.
Classroom management, that's another thing, but that's a whole nother topic. Yeah, how do you get picked? What do you do when kids are falling asleep in class? You know, just little things, like just things that a college professor might say, I don't have time to go over that because it's so much. It really is. So yeah, what do? We just get experience. I think that's what we had to do. So hopefully there are teachers and professors today who they're paying more attention to students now and saying, well, I need to be covering things that are more beneficial, because the theories, anything in the textbook, you know, some of that's good, but we need to be giving people the tools to actually do the job, because they're getting there and they're being thrown into the wolves. I know I was thrown into the wolves, and there weren't really a lot of people to help me because there's just not a lot of time. You're isolated in a classroom by yourself. If you're lucky, you have a co-teacher, and sometimes that co-teacher is not always your buddy. So you're having to learn through experience and say, okay, our teaching system is outdated. We know we learn things out here. Now let's go and try to fix it. Go into the schools and fix it. Okay, so great answers, everybody. I'll say Alma did say this. You guys can kind of think about it on your own, but with going back to the history explanation of, I wish it had been made more meaningful for you, to where, like, why am I learning it? What does it mean? It's a highly political decision, sure, because if your country has any little scars from the past, which most countries do, they sometimes try to explain it away or hide it, or it's not, or sometimes people are too cynical about it. So that's something I think that happens. Yeah, reflection of our literature. She also says what parts of history get covered and how they approach. Okay, that is political. It's often easier to understand it through literature. Yeah, so English and history crossing over, that's one way. But see, so much of this I now understand. When I was younger, I don't think, and maybe you guys can relate, I don't think I had the maturity to really appreciate what I was learning back then.
I was going to say I think this is really true. It's very political, and it's often easier to understand through literature. And that's one reason why I started to like history, because I realized that, oh, it's just the stories of what has happened before. So like when I homeschooled my kids, I was like, we're never opening a history book, because like a textbook, because I think they're very boring and they just ruin your interest in history. So we didn't open a history book. Instead, we read all kinds of stories, mostly true stories about people who were there. And that's what I think made it interesting, you know.
You like reading historical fiction to your students, right?
I like reading history, true history to my students, you know.
Well, there was like a book about, let's say it's about the Dust Bowl, real things that happened, but let's say the fiction book is just made up characters. There's a character named Linda, there's a character named Clara,
Yeah.
and then here they are, but their experience was what happened in history. I always liked that.
Yeah.
If you can find it, it makes you understand, oh yeah, we learned about that in school, but now that I'm reading a story about it, I can connect to it better.
Yeah,
Well,
but there's a really good book about the Dust Bowl that's a true story. It's called the Worst Hard Times. That's a really good one, and it's all true.
but there's the Little House books.
Oh yeah, Little House on the
You
Prairie.
know,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
really resonate with that, what you're saying,
Mhm.
because I recommend to my, middle schoolers all the time to read the Little House books, because they have the history of the pioneers and all the things that happened. And then if you go to a textbook, it's all the same stuff, only it enlivens it for them because it's a story. And then sometimes with struggling readers, it's easier to read a narrative than it is an expository piece or like a textbook piece. So that's a way that they can get in to learning more. And it's a little bit easier text for them as they're increasing their skills. But the other thing is with leveled readers, you know, someone had asked a question in a Facebook group that I'm a part of over the weekend about, well, I haven't been teaching for 10 years. I'm getting back into it. What have I missed? And she was a reading teacher, like I'm a reading teacher. And someone said leveled readers. And it reminded me of that whole thing, you know, leveled readers. They also, I guess, call them decodables, but books that have sort of like they're all on the second grade level or they're all on the third grade level, and the words are chosen for that difficulty level. And so you're not going to get some other word thrown in there that you might not be able to read.
Is that where they
And-
learn the concept, but at their appropriate level?
Yes, which is it's good to learn at what we call instructional level, which is where you're missing like maybe 4 or 5 words in a chapter so that you have something to learn, but you don't want to learn at frustration level when you're missing like every other word or your brain just kind of shuts off. However, I have noticed that my students' conversation is so much better when I use classic literature with them instead of the decodables.
This
Because
actually goes right into, sorry, Linda, this goes into our next question, actually. So kind of good segue here. What do you wish today's students could learn? What do you wish? I think Claire has to leave early, so I want to make sure you get your answer in. If you're teaching students now with their own tutoring business and you're seeing, oh, they're just not learning this, or I wish they would, or I'm teaching them, but I wish overall they learn more. What are some things you wish that they were able to learn more in, like, while they are in the schools?
I would say this live stream is called What Do Schools Fail to Teach Our Kids, which makes it seem like it's the school's job to feed the kids a little bit. But I would say to the kids that they need to take personal responsibility for their own learning. That's what I wish that schools teach their kids. So
Okay.
that they can look to fill in their own gaps and not just grow up into an 18-year-old and then say, well, we didn't learn anything in school.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's a easy, lazy answer. I didn't learn. Actually, it was more like I didn't learn nothing. I heard that phrase so many times in school, and it's not a negative thing, right? I did, and it's not. It's a lie, isn't it? They're lying to themselves. You have learned something. Now, could you have learned more or learned better? Yes. Sometimes that's it's the fault of the negative thinking. So yeah, I like what you said. I agree that it's like, but again, how do we show them? I try to show my students what they go have an online student portal. They can go and check their grades, check their status. They have to go and look and be looking. And sometimes it's brand new to them. They've never been shown how because it's their first time. So showing them how to take accountability, I can show them that, but it would be a lot nicer if they'd had the time in schools to self-evaluate.
Like
What-
honestly self-evaluates.
Yeah, not, oh, I'm already good at this, I got it. No, like, are they going to be able to critically evaluate themselves and say, well, I understand the long division, but I'm really struggling with percentages. Like, I don't really get this. It's okay to like have them. We want them to be able to say, hey, here's my strengths, but I'm not understanding this, instead of just saying, I don't get it, I don't get it. Darcy, what's something you think, yeah, I wish they were learning these things, these values, these concepts, anything?
I really like what Clara said, that they need to take responsibility and decide to learn. So whatever they're learning, like to say to themselves, I'm not going to make this be a waste of my time. Why waste my time in this class unless I learn something? I'm going to learn it good so that it makes a difference to me. And yeah.
Because the value of time. Okay, Claire's going to actually teach a student now, guys. So, but when it comes to, wishing what they would learn, so Linda, you can just briefly, because I've got a couple other questions here I want to make sure we get through because they're at 12:57. With the books, Or is there anything else quickly you can mention? I wish that students were learning these things, but they're missing out.
Well, I wanted to talk about syllables. So in the 90s, a lot of people who follow issues of education, especially with reading, know that, excuse me, in the 1990s, the school system separated from teaching reading through phonics. And then in the 2000s, like actually the year 2000, the federal government decided, oops, we made a huge mistake and brought back phonics. But the mandate now is for teachers to use that they can use mixed methods. So a lot of teachers just kind of mash it up, they use what they learned in the 90s and which was not phonics, and they kind of put some phonics in there. But what we've got now is not a return to the good old system that worked. It is it's a grab bag. So what I want to say about that is that one of the biggest casualties has been understanding syllabication. Because most kids can understand the concept of a syllable when we clap it out with them at first. When we say strawberry, strawberry. 1, 2, 3. It has 3 syllables. Any little kid can understand that. And they can hear it. However, about 2nd grade, at a certain point, you have to make a shift in your understanding of syllabication, because it's not always going to be, the word is not always going to be split into syllables based on how it sounds. So the shift that occurs is into spelling rules. And so if you have a word like rabbit, R-A-B-B-I-T, well, the way we say it is rabbit. But that's not how you syllabicate rabbit. You syllabicate it between the B's, so it's rab and bit. And the reason this is so important is because if you have what we call a closed syllable, and we used to teach that to children, so it has consonants on either side of the vowel, that vowel is pronounced short. It's pronounced ah.
So you're saying that the way that syllables are being taught, if students are struggling to read, it's because there's a lack of the way syllables are broken down.
It's the transition that you have to make from, okay, a syllable is something I hear, into a syllable is something that follows spelling rules. And spelling rules are just like not popular. Even spelling itself has been dropped from a lot of curriculums.
Yeah,
because,
I remember
they could just use
I used to. I did.
What?
I want to make sure we get it in this last, well, it may or may not be our last one, but I want to put this in just for a moment because I recognize what you're saying there, Linda. I remember. So one helpful thing, because maybe we learned it and we're showing that to our students now. For me, I'm really glad that I learned typing. They had that was a subject we started. You know who helped us learn typing? They made our music teacher take us into the computer lab for a whole week. And we began this horrible program called Touch Typing for Beginners. And it was why, over and over again. And then YT. And then finally, you can type and then, okay, type without looking. Don't look down. And you love the backspace or the delete key. It's your best friend. It still is. But what are we all doing now? We're using our laptops or desktops. We're on our computers quite a bit. So I'm glad. I'll notice that a lot of students that have now, they've either taken it out of schools or it's like you mentioned the word grab bag. It's very much a grab bag as to if they're learning to type or not, because that's we call a manual skill. That's not, oh, I wish I learned about this war or this math concept. It's just parents probably don't have the time to make sure their kids are learning to type. So that's hopefully something that the schools, I think, should be meeting. The schools are the ones my school had computers, and this was, not every kid had a laptop, but I think there's no excuse for giving a kid a laptop, but not giving them typing classes. Anyway, that's just my thing. Okay, Darcy, what's one helpful thing that you learned during your school days?
Well, talking about that made me think about handwriting as well. Handwriting nowadays isn't taught very much. I don't think they teach. I mean, they do, like in kindergarten, first grade, they tell kids, here's how you form this letter. But there's 30 kids in the class and they can't make sure they're doing that. And I think it makes a big difference. I mean, not only in, I mean, some little girls, they enjoy like art, so they get good and have really pretty handwriting, but the rest of the classes do it, and they're forming the letters all different ways. I actually think that it helps if you're dyslexic, it helps you to know how to form your letters. Knowing how to form your letters helps you not to mix up your B's and D's. And especially if you were to write in cursive, and nobody learns cursive anymore.
Oh gosh, I learned it, but yeah, I don't use it often now. In fact, I remember going to middle school and being kind of teased for writing in cursive, like, oh, we don't do that here. And so I started printing more. And because of that, my handwriting got worse. Like it just didn't look as good. I thought my cursive did look good because our school spent time doing it. But now usually I'm looking at my handwriting now thinking I'm so used to just printing instead of cursive. I sign my name. Like I'll sometimes do cursive, but I find that without that practice, it's not the same. But yeah, I think it's like if you want to learn cursive, the parents will find someone to teach their kid cursive. Otherwise, it's not consistently being shown. Linda, what's one thing you wish you'd learned in school? Or one helpful thing you did?
One helpful thing I did. Well, I also learned to type, and I didn't just learn to handwrite. I had a wonderful 8th grade teacher, and she made the school buy the whole typewriter stations and all that. So we learned to type, but we also learned calligraphy.
That's cool.
And then when I was in college, I was making $15 an hour doing the diplomas when everyone else had these little $3.50 and $5 an hour jobs. I had this skill, and I really love what Darcy said about handwriting, especially with dyslexia. And I actually have all my reading students who have, anywhere from mild to moderate dyslexia. I always have them download those old fashioned first grade,
the bar, the dotted line, the bar line.
Yeah. The sky, the ground, and the fence, right? With the dotted line in the middle. And it takes like maybe 2 days. And as soon as they have to fit that in, they do it. And it's really interesting because the topic of this live is what did you not get in school? And now we're talking about helpful things we did get in school.
They should be there.
It's really interesting how we drop things that worked, isn't it? Like we did get these things. There were helpful things like typing and handwriting. There were these very helpful things. And then we stopped doing them. And to come full circle, the fact that history repeats itself, what is this forgetting that we do with the things that work,
And now is a good time to mention that you can learn handwriting skills online. So, and there's another teacher in our community, another tutor who she'll teach like handwriting. That's a skill that's like little kids can learn how to do it, but you've got to know how to do it. But it can be done. Like she'll use the same thing where you've got those chunky lines. I remember having to get those fat pencils in first grade, and they just made us write, like we had to write all the letters out, because even though we spend most of our time typing and all that, how illiterate would we be? Like we'd be a lot more limited if we couldn't write things down by hand. It still matters. It's still okay. It's still useful to learn some of those skills that have been around forever. It doesn't mean just, AI cannot do everything for us. Not everything. Not yet. Anyway.
Can I just say one little quick thing? And it's about what Clara said, and I know she's gone, but maybe she'll see this on the recording later. But you know how she said that students are like, I didn't learn anything, or it seems like they're not taking responsibility for their learning. Well, I feel like one of the cries from the heart that I hear when I see students not engaged like that is that they are not receiving a basis of prior knowledge to understand culture. So what we're talking about, like you see Clara's background has all this math, this higher math on it, right? And we're talking about literature and we're talking about history and, you know, we're talking about handwriting, like the ability to write your own name, to sign it, right? These things have to do with culture, but culture arises from ideas. And so if you're sitting in school all day and people are throwing these higher ideas at you, but you don't have a context because you've been raised just with a lot of media and not really
traveled. A lot of kids haven't traveled. They don't know what it's like to be. It's great if a teacher and if a school can convey, here's why you're learning these concepts. Here's where history of math comes into things. Here's how our language came about, how some languages never had an alphabet. All of that's really fascinating, but getting people on board with knowing that and then how it matters to them, that's really what schools is to continue to fail at doing. Why are we doing it? What is this for? Some kids, even though in our opinion they should learn as much as they can, I think that they really just want to know, how is this going to help me? Not all students sitting in the classrooms are going to want to continue up through university. They're going to need to know what's going to be beneficial for them. We've got to show them at anything that's available to them, but at a certain point, they're going to pick something, and we need to be able to nurture that. So when I'm with my students, I try to share everything that I know, but I'll say, what is it? I always ask them what they're interested in. Like, when I know their strengths, I try to build on that. So I'm not just teaching them what I like, because that's tempting to do, but I try to show them, and I'm sure you guys do too, with what you want to do later on in life, what can we do now to prepare you for that?
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to do, there's so much more to be said, but I've got to end it here. Next time, either probably in a couple of weekends, I want us to go live and talk about the pros and cons of public and private school, like how the learning environment is different, and how we approach that as online tutors, because I've got students from all the sectors, right? Public, private, homeschool. There's probably something else I'm not thinking of, but we help them all no matter where they're coming from. So, and that's always worth discussing because we've got that expertise and we're learning more of it. So I'm going to end it now simply for time, but guys, thanks so much for coming. It's always wonderful to get to discuss these, and we can take our time and do more discussion over the years, over the weeks and months. But thanks for coming. And guys, always be sure to share this, like this, watch it, share it with another tutor who you think, gosh, you need to have so-and-so come on and speak to this, because they would love that. All right, you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.